Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Let me know if everything is coming through okay. I think I've now finally got it to where I can do these things and I've got all the technical setup ready to go, and so we should be good there. But if something's not coming through, let me know. Um, and tonight we are going to talk all things percussion related. Well, I guess we've been talking about that for this will be the third week in a row. Last week we covered timpani. The week before was the mallet and tune percussion. And this week we'll go ahead and finish up with everything else, including the drums, the cymbals, gongs, tam tams, all that fun stuff. Frame rate is very low. Piccolo, there's not much I can do about that. My upload speed at home is as good as it's going to get for now until I switch my internet provider. I literally have the highest bandwidth that AT&T offers in my area, and it still sucks. But anyway, first thing is first. There's a giant new drawing behind me. I'll back out of the way. Maybe you can see it. It's not in a great place camera-wise, but it's this giant thing right here. And it is a new project I'm working on. If you follow me on Instagram or on Facebook, you might know what it is, but let me go ahead and move back here and kind of stand next to it so you can kind of grasp what it is. So, what I've got here is the first design of the great bassoon, the great bass bassoon. And I am doing the initial design on it. As you can see, right now the whole beast is right at 6 feet 8 inches tall, and that is with a low A bell in there. I use a seat strap most of the time, bassoonist. I use a harness when I stand to play, but if I'm seated, I typically it's just a seat strap. But yeah, since Jared is here, Jared has been helping out a bunch on this design. He has created some tone hole calculators, and I have been basically knee deep in math. For the past week working on this, and this is an actual scale drawing that, however, is before tone hole placements have been calculated, and it will actually get a little bit smaller, at least 2 inches smaller to bring it down to about 6'8". Am I going to build this with Richard? Probably not with him, but he's definitely having a lot of input on it. He's done a lot of the initial math on it, and so I'm using some mathematical stuff that he's already calculated. For instance, when I first did the initial design, I was using a bore taper that is equal to that of the regular bassoon. The regular bassoon has a bore taper of 0.8, so it's a 0.8 angle. And then Richard informed me that that's actually probably going to be too big. And he said it probably would be better at a 0.73. So I had to recalculate everything to a 0.73 angle. And as you can see, the math gets fuzzy. I've been going through a notebook and going through and doing everything. But yeah, it's been fun, and it looks like I will be getting a 3D printer, so I'll be able to start 3D printing some of the parts. But don't expect a finished instrument for like 2 years. I don't. I'm not going to fast track it. All right, but we'll probably do a live stream all about creating the Great Bassoon at some point. I'm starting to get some feelers out on it, but it'll be fun. But let's get into percussion. Fuzzy math. No, this is not fuzzy math. This is absolute concrete. It's all algebra and trigonometry. Thankfully, I've not had to get into any calculus yet. But I foresee calculus coming into play at some point. Maybe. Depending on how much acoustical modeling I'll have to do. Will it be regular bassoon shape? Yes, it will be regular bassoon shape. I'm not planning on doing any extraneous bends, just the simple bend in the boot joint and the bocal, though I will probably do a different bocal shape on it. And the instrument is designed to play, this is a G instrument. This is only a fourth lower. An instrument a fifth lower would be larger still. So there's a good reason not to do the one in F. It's going to have a dinosaur head. Yeah. One of my out there things is there is a bassoon, a contrabassoon out there that was designed with a serpent or a dragon head. And I think it's kind of badass. And so what I want to do is I'm going to put a dinosaur head on it because I like dinosaurs. And since it's going to be so tall above there, what better thing to do than Giraffe Titan, like the tallest of all the dinosaurs. Formerly known by most people as Brachiosaurus. So the big tall dinosaur you see in Jurassic Park, it'll have that head on there. I have no clue how to do calculus, so I guess instrument design isn't something I can do. So far I haven't had to do any calculus, but there is a lot of advanced math involved. Thankfully, my last name being Newton, calculus is something that I was trained to do. Joke that Sir Isaac Newton was the person who invented calculus. Though, if you want to get technical, some people will say Leibniz. But anyway, we've gone a bit off stream, haven't we? All right, percussion. Hey, sweeter. Yeah. Go ahead and hit me with any of your percussion questions. Will it have feathers, though? No, it will not, because this is a sauropod, and we know that sauropods did not have feathers. In fact, with the new cladogram, sauropods actually branch outside of all the clades that have feathers. And that's if Ornithoscelida is a valid taxonomy or not. So, can't stump me there, Jared. Come on. It will have spikes, though. All right, so percussion. So I'd like to. There's a passage in Rimsky-Korsakov that I'd like to read, and I probably should find it. So while I'm finding it, go ahead and if you've got any questions about your general percussion instruments. I sympathize with you in your last name being Newton. My initials spell Bach, and I play and compose music. Was that by design? All right. Yeah, Ratchet, you know where I'm going. The famous Rimsky-Korsakov passage. I should have looked this up beforehand, but what was actually happening beforehand, and why I almost was going to be late, is I was on the Discord server. And if you don't know, you can get access to our Discord server if you're a member of Patreon. And we've been having really just a lively conversation there that's been ranging from real detailed design aspects of the great bass to, we've been talking percussion writing today. I released a new chapter of one of the upcoming books. Uh, you know what? I'll find it later. Me looking at a book does not make for interesting watching, but I know where it is, and it's been. Anyway, would you consider piano a percussion instrument because it's operated by the strings being hit by hammers? Technically, yes, it is a percussion instrument. However, it should not be played by a percussionist. And here is where some people, get in trouble, is they'll score the piano as a percussion instrument to be played by a percussionist. Don't do that. Same thing in regard to the cellist. In fact, Ratchet and I were talking earlier on the Discord in that he got a part where the cellist was put into one of the percussion parts. It's like, no, don't do that. It is a keyboard instrument. I don't have a specific question, but I'm interested in considering which percussion instruments can be used more as texture than percussion as such, like soft mallet, cymbals, gongs, and brushes on drums. Okay, so what you're asking is more background versus rhythmic, I think. Anything with a very long sustain on it, and this is going to be mostly your larger metal percussion instruments, particularly those that are indefinite pitch, and your very, very large drums, which basically means bass drum. So bass drum and any of your large plate metal plate percussion. When I say plate, it means cymbals, gongs, tam tams. By the way, this is a big pet peeve of mine. Most composers and a lot of performers will mix up what a gong and a tam tam is. The big instrument you see sitting in the back of the percussion section that you hit and it makes this big whoosh sound, that's a tam tam. It does not have a specific pitch. It is flat. Gongs, on the other hand, will have a specific pitch, and there's a raised bump. Remember, gongs have nipples, tam-tams don't. That's actually the specific term. The raised bump in the center is called a nipple, and I'm getting demonetized. He said something like, composers will think that all sounds come from the percussion section when they are first writing. Yeah, it's something like that. I've heard a band piece that calls for found percussion, basically anything you can find in the immediate area that can be used percussively. Oh yeah, found percussion is definitely a thing. A lot of times it boils down to like paint cans and garbage cans and stuff like that. And there's something along the lines like John Mackey's Asphalt Cocktail does that. Yes, Ratchet, you seem to get that a lot, you being a percussionist, the difference between a tam-tam and a gong. Most of the time when you're writing, you want to write for tam-tam. Gongs are actually pretty rare. You can actually get full chromatic sets of gongs in a really, really large range, like 4.5 octaves worth of gongs, going down below the bass clef. It's like at least C2, maybe B flat 1. And of course, the bigger they get, the less distinct the tone gets. But you can also go up pretty high. If you want a really good distinction between tam-tams and gongs, go listen to Messiaen's Et Expecto Resurrectionem Mortuorum. God, I love saying that name. The Latin just gets creepy. And of course, it's a creepy meaning, and I await the resurrection of the dead. Just a creepy piece. But yeah, he has a large section of gongs and tam tams. I have a basket of mixed small percussion and found percussion, party noisemakers from the Target dollar bins. Yeah, you can use that. Gongs are tuned typically, and they make very small tam tams. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Size doesn't matter. It's the pitch distinction as well as the overall shape. And then within gongs there are various different kinds, because you can have an opera gong, which is typically what gets used for tune. You've got Thai gongs, which have a very, very deep rim. Like, the rim on it's like this big. They're the gongs you use for Balinese gamelan, including the big gong gang, which is a great name. The Machine Awakes by Stephen Bryant ends in a huge tam tam strike. Oh yeah, big tam tam strikes are pretty common. I first got really turned on to using tam tams was one of the earliest pieces of orchestra music I ever saw live was the Dallas Symphony did a children's or a free Sunday afternoon concert years and years ago, and they played Ottorino Respighi's Church Windows. Oh my God, it's a fantastic piece. It was one of the first times they really got to show off their brand new organ. And the end of that piece, the Vision of St. Michael, he's got 3 or 4 giant tam-tams going in the back with the massive pipe organ, and you're just sitting there, oh, it's like, oh, I like tam-tams. So yeah, if I'm using, I have been known to use 4 distinct tam-tams in my pieces. High, medium, low, and low. Dum, dum, dum. And, you know, you give them a nice peel. Boom, 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 boom. They're fantastic. And they give, you know, they will have relative pitches, but they don't have distinct pitches. So, yeah, the gongs and tam-tams are some of my favorite things to use. But here's one of the things with them. They will get overused at times. If you use them too much, they lose their effectiveness. A big hit here and there is great. On the other end, the very, very soft, a very, very soft tam-tam hit, particularly for a very large one. The larger they are, the more impressive a soft hit is. It's one of those, the sound, you won't necessarily hear it, but you will feel it. It'll just kind of envelop the whole ensemble. Plates are cool. There's a piece by Adam Gorb called Dances from Crete, where the last note in the 4th movement is a plate smash. Literally plates. Opa! And you throw your dinner plate down. Hopefully you've gotten all the turkey and cranberry sauce off of it first, though, because it's a shame to waste cranberry sauce. But, yeah, it's if you do a tam-tam, very, very soft hit. It's one of my favorite things to accompany just kind of a mystical sound. Put that with a very, very soft bass drum. Oh, that's tasty, and that's something that will be very, very nice. All right, in fact, a favorite of mine are the Treshetka. No standard romanization, I think. Made of a dozen or 2 wooden planks twined together for group hand claps, squirrel-like scrape, and a kind of gallop sound. I think I know what you're talking about, Sweeter. Yeah, I think so. I think Peisty makes an 8-inch. Yeah, Peisty does make an 8-inch, though Actually, sometimes they make the 80 inches come out a lot bigger than 80 inch. I think somebody measured one time. Oh, look, this is like 86 inches. Oops. Like, oh, I'm sorry, we got extra gong here. Extra Tam Tam. Gong is so much easier to say than Tam Tam. And that's, yeah. But anyway, yeah, the Pice, the 80 inch, is one of the most incredible percussion instruments ever produced. And they are hella expensive. I mean, Ratchet, how have you seen how much they are recently? I remember 20 years ago they were in the $20,000 range. I can't imagine what they've gone up today. I would bet they're probably close to 40 grand for that one Tam Tam. But anyway, the instrument I was talking about that pairs best with Tam Tam is the bass drum. And so we can talk bass drum. Bass drum is my favorite of the non-timpani drums. And it's the one I'll use the most. The thing I don't like, though, is the very standard march style bass drum. Boom, 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 boom. And in order to do that sound, what you have to do is you have to dampen the drum. So you're just getting a basic thud. And that, to me, the bass drum is the only drum that I feel has a soul to it. If you hit the bass drum just right, it will ring, it will reverberate, and it feel like it sings. And none of the other drums do that. Just this soft hit on a bass drum will reverberate the entire hall, and it just rumbles something in your core, and it is just the most magical feeling. And then you take that and you go to John Philip Sousa. Boom, 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 boom. It's like, you're just taking the soul out of the instrument. You dementor. And the answer is, I'm guessing 40, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 60. But yeah, bass drum is, like I said, my favorite of the drums to write for, and I'll use it the most. It's great for rolls. A roll on the bass drum, 28. Surprise! I was thinking nearly double that. What a bargain for a piece of bronze. But yeah. Bass drum on a roll is a great sustain. It's something that will, if you do a bass drum roll underneath a sustain in a pitched instrument, it will feel like the bass drum is adding an extra octave below it. Even if that note's like a pedal C on the contrabassoon, you do a bass drum roll, very, very soft underneath that, and it will feel like you've added Richard's subcontrabassoon underneath it. This kind of effect is shown best in the opening of Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra, the big 2001: A Space Odyssey opening. The very first note you hear is double basses, bass drum, contrabassoon, and the pedal on the organ. Yeah, soft rolls. Yeah, it's definitely a texture thing. It's not rhythmic. It's just this thing that you feel, and it's one of those great things that percussion can do. And it's a psychological element too. It's not something that transfers well to recording. You have to really be in the room with the bass drum to fully appreciate a true bass drum roll. Wood blocks are probably my favorite auxiliary percussion instrument. I feel sorry for you. Wood blocks are literally my least favorite percussion instrument, right next to the snare drum. And I say this because of how wood blocks have the status that wood blocks have become in the last 20-25 years, probably. They have come to represent the machine. And that's probably thanks to John Adams' Short Ride and Fast Machine, which is built around the woodblock. And there was a time when the woodblock was used for gentle effects. And now it represents mechanism, it represents everything unnatural in the world, city sounds, machinery. J.R.R. Tolkien would be appalled at that kind of music, and he would want to go back and hide in his trees. So yeah, woodblock has developed this symbolism, this stereotypical sound that it just does not speak to me at all. I wrote for woodblock once in a very early band piece that I doubt I'll ever try and get performed. I may go back to it at some point, but I don't think I ever need to write for it again. My favorite is that bass drums make the orchestration feel bigger than it is. Yes, and that's exactly true. Is there a proper name for the two slappy sticks that make a whip sound in Leroy Anderson's Sleigh Ride? Yeah, it's called a whip. True, even acoustically less than ideal room is better for feeling bass drum than an excellent recording. Yeah. Would J.R.R. Tolkien like Morton Feldman? No. I don't think so. Tolkien was too much of a traditionalist. I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien didn't like Wagner, and Wagner was writing some of the most natural music. Tolkien probably would have liked Bach. My favorite use of woodblocks is variations of a Korean folk song. Okay, so those aren't actually woodblocks; those are temple blocks, and so there is a slight difference there. So the woodblock is just simply a single block. The temple blocks are rounded; they're hollow. They have a much warmer sound. They have a longer decay on them. And I know the Korean folk song, but it is a different instrument there, and properly it should sound quite a bit different than wood blocks. A lot of times, what will get used instead of true temple blocks are granite blocks. Granite blocks are much more harsh sounding. They are made of that really, really hard plastic. You'll typically see them in gradations of 5. They're gray. Or sometimes you'll even see them in bright red. On the marching field, they'll take a granite block and hit it with the hardest stick they've got, and they call it a gok block. And that's your metronome. And it's so unmusical. Putsta has a prominent woodblock part in Movement 3. It's been so many years since I played Putsta. I used to play a lot of Jan van der Roost, particularly back in high school, and he was really popular in the late 90s for honor bands, like All District, All Region, all that fun stuff. There's a piece by Chi Chung Chin that's a set of variations for orchestra where the theme starts in the temple blocks. It's going to be something that you'll see it very, very stereotypically in Chinese or Korean themed music. There is There's a stereotypical element to them. Translates something like noodling or messing around. Yep. It's not Christmas ST. It's the day after Thanksgiving. We still got a month before Christmas. Merry post-turkey glutton day, though. Turkey. All right, so we've covered gongs, tam tams, bass drum, temple blocks, wood blocks. What's next? What's next? Cymbals. Let's do cymbals. So we got two varieties of cymbals: crash cymbals and suspended. So interestingly, there's some different terminologies are used depending on where you are. So if you see in a piece of music, just the term cymbals, it is the two cymbals hit together. In the United States, we call those crash cymbals. In the UK, they call them clash cymbals. And in Hollywood, they call them piatti. Here's why they use that term in Hollywood. So they use piatti there because there is... it's just to avoid any confusion between suspended cymbal and crash cymbal. So Hollywood defaults to piatti, which is the Italian term for the crash cymbals. It depends heavily on tradition. It's a vague term, but by default, the term cymbals on its own just means crash cymbals. And that's default for pretty much any composer who's ever written for it. The only time they would deviate from that, they would write suspended cymbal or, roll with mallets, so to make it very distinct. It's only in the last probably 40, 50 years that we've really had to make a full distinction between crash cymbals and suspended cymbals, because some genius out there decided to take, when they're making the drum sets, one of the cymbals in a drum set, it's called the crash cymbal, yet it is a suspended cymbal, therefore leading to the confusion. So you've got a crash cymbal that's on the drum set, but these are crash cymbals. One's a suspended cymbal, these aren't. So, and because Hollywood doesn't know what to do, they're just like, what's the cleanest term? Piatti. Good, done. Right, and so, on the drum kit, they've got a crash cymbal, they've got a ride cymbal. The ride cymbal is played mostly on the bell. So you've got the bell of the cymbal, and then you've got the sides, the dome. The bell or the dome. So, cymbal terminology is only confusing once we get the drum set involved. And the drum set just confused everything. And leave it out. Now, there are two distinct kinds of cymbals. There are Turkish cymbals, and the Turkish cymbals are the traditional cymbals that you see everywhere. That's the crash cymbals. That's your suspended cymbals. That's your cymbals in the drum kit. What do I mean by Hollywood? Well, literally, it's film composing. Hollywood film composers have developed their own traditions that are fascinating, and it's very little documented because nobody really writes about it. Drum set or drum kit, same thing, just depending on what you want to call it. I like the splash cymbal. Splash cymbals, for a while, had a really big heyday, probably about 20 years ago. Marching bands, for whatever reason, got just this enormous love for the splash cymbal and the FX cymbal. Basically, the splash cymbal is about this big. It's as thin as you can possibly make a cymbal. And they would wheel out a cart onto the marching field and let all their snare drummers just beat the living hell out of these splash cymbals. And at the end of the season, they throw them away because they destroyed them all. And they were only like $50-$60 a cymbal. So, I mean, these really big marching bands could afford them. But anyway, I was getting back to Turkish cymbals, and then the other tradition are Chinese cymbals. Chinese cymbals, instead of having the very tapered dome, taper down, and then they come back up. And often there will be an area on the top where you can actually grab onto it and hold it. The Chinese cymbals have a much more splash to them. They almost sound like a really high-pitched Tam Tam. Interestingly enough, Turkish cymbals have a fascinating history. And it's from Turkey that cymbals got introduced into the orchestras and bands. They were used by the Janissary bands that were invading into Austria at the time. And the composers who saw these bands was like, whoa, what are those? Those are cymbals. Oh, you don't see really any cymbals before 1750 or so. You don't really see them in the Baroque era. But after that, you start seeing them. And it's always to emulate Turkish music. Anyway, the Turkish name for a cymbal is a zil, Z-I-L. And there was one family that made cymbals in Turkey. And they were given a decree by the Sultan. Was it the Sultan? I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. It's the Ottoman Empire at this point. So they were given a decree by, we'll say it's the Sultan. And the family got the name Zildjian, which literally means cymbal maker. Zildjian is still in business. They are still the leading producer of cymbals. 400 years later. And that's absolutely amazing that the same company is still producing cymbals. Probably the same kind of cymbals that Mozart and Beethoven would have heard. So yeah, our Crotales cymbals, yes and no. As Ratchet said, their original name was Antique Cymbals, and you'll see that being used in scores like Berlioz's Romeo and Juliet, the Queen Mab Scherzo. Because what happened is in ancient Roman ruins, and I think it was Pompeii, that they found a pair, or two pairs actually, of crotales. And in this case, the crotales were like finger cymbals. Finger cymbals and crotales are very, very closely related. Finger cymbals are not pitched, crotales are. These would have been played like finger cymbals, but they were tuned to a very specific pitch. And Berlioz took this idea and ran with it, meaning that crotales were actually one of the first mallet or tuned percussion instruments introduced into the orchestra. Keyboard glockenspiel, then crotales, and regular glockenspiel, and then finally xylophone. That's still, 1870s, 1880s at that point. Here in Canada, almost every cymbal you'll find is made by Sabian. So, Sabian, it was a cousin of Zildjian. So the Sabian family is related to the Zildjian family, and they split off the manufacturing at some point, but they actually are related. It was like Sabian Zildjian was the guy's name, or something along those lines. Yeah. The only cymbal company that's not really related is Peisty. And Peisty is Swiss. They're more known for their gongs and tam tams. They are for their cymbals. Um, let's see what else. I guess we probably should talk about snare drums. Snare drums, tenor drums, field drums. They all are basically related. So snare drum is also known as a side drum, though you will see in some scores that will make a distinction between snare drum and side drum. Let's see what the sweeter say. The cymbal industry is interesting. There's endless variation available for suspended cymbal, treating like different schemes of portholes and sandblasting, deliberately darker versus lighter, noisier. Yeah, it's you change one little element on them and it changes out a lot of the playing characteristics. And percussion is just like having lots of gear around, and cymbals aren't that expensive in the grand scheme of things compared to bassoons. But anyway, snare drums, side drums. So if you run across a score that calls for both snare drum and side drum, typically the snare drum is going to be a much narrower instrument. Think along the terms of about 8 inches in depth, even as much as a 4-inch in depth that we would call a Piccolo snare drum, though it really doesn't play any higher. It's just not as deep. And then a side drum would be about 14 inches, even down to about 20 inches deep. And the reason it would be called a side drum, it was played off to the side, which is one reason that you'd see drummers play with a traditional grip. And this is probably not a true traditional grip, but it's close to it. I never learned traditional grip. I know people that lathe their own cymbals. Yeah, God, I want to lathe. Cymbals are one of the hardest things to synthesize because of all the chaos. Yeah. Life finds a way. That may have been way too nerdy of a reference there, but we'll see if anybody gets it. I like snares to be either piccolo or deep, not the usual medium. I like snares to be in somebody else's piece. So the older I get, the less I want to use snare drums. And unless I'm writing a battle scene, a military scene, or something like that, I don't really feel the need to use a snare drum anymore. I did use snare drum in the fourth movement of Symphony 4, but that was kind of to appease the masses. Like, hey, I'll dance your dance, I'll do your thing. Now, I have scored for field drum before. Field drum is going to be a much deeper snare drum, looser snares, deeper pitch. Tenor drum is the same thing, but with the snares taken off. Where it gets confusing with tenor drum is the things that people march around on the marching field that have an array of 4, 5, or 6 drums that they call tenors are not technically true tenor drums. Yeah, they'll call them tenors. They are a type of Tam Tam. But they've got, these bulletproof heads on them to make them sound unbelievably loud. They're not really concert instruments because they're not designed to be played inside. And so that is something that you have to deal with. When I was a band director, we were playing a piece that called for a deep field drum. And we didn't have one, but we did have a marching snare drum. So what I did is I took the marching snare drum, I and I just removed the old Kevlar head. And yes, they literally are made out of Kevlar. They're bulletproof. Don't ask me. Okay, I'll tell you how I know that. For a time, I was in deep redneck East Texas in high school, and a couple of the percussionists decided they were going to take their marching percussion drum out into a field with a 22 and shot the head of it and bounced right off. So yeah, snare drum heads are bulletproof. But anyway, so what I did is I took this marching snare drum and I took off this bulletproof head and I put on a very traditional, I think it was a Remo fiber skin head, and it gave a much closer to a tenor drum or field drum feel to it. I feel snare is more important to rock, EDM than classical. The snare plays the backbeat. Snare in classical music is mostly to make a very large penetrating sound. Yes. I mean, go look with snare drum. I mean, go look at something like the Shostakovich Seventh or the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, which literally is making fun of Shostakovich 7 because Bartok hated that piece. Or something like the ballerina's dance from Petrushka. I mean, there's lots of examples. There's several from Richard Strauss. Yeah. Quad or quint toms is the correct name. Though I don't even know if you could really call them toms either. We played a piece called for Scottish snare, so we just use a marching snare. Scottish snare, would that be a rope tension drum? I'm going to assume there. Rope tension drums will have a different feel to them as well. My friend William Austin makes rope tension drums. He just finished making a contrabass drum. Like, I think he made it at 90 inches width. It was a badass drum he made. KJ. But again, in that instance, the snare drum there is being used very much to evoke a feel of military or war, and that is the connotation of the snare drum. It is there to evoke the sound of military. And because the wind band has had such a strong affiliation with military music, the snare drum has become so intertwined with it. And somebody mentioned earlier that it's used so much in rock and EDM. Well, it's all the same thing. But where did it get that? Well, it came from those military bands. So the military bands were there, and they had this snare drum. It's that military instrument. Who picks it up? Well, it's the jazz musicians. They're going to take that. And the jazz, of course, then morphs into rock, and then that proliferates into all of our modern pop music. I started with percussion. I switched to woodwinds a few weeks after. Good choice, Jolly. Pipe drums are another name for them. A snare drum with snares on both heads. Some of the weirdest feeling drums. I'm not a percussionist. I could only imagine that would just have a much buzzier sound. In case you don't know what the snares are, underneath so the snare drum has two heads. A batter head, which is on top, which is what you hit it against, and then underneath is a snare head. Against that are usually about 12 or so. They used to be made out of gut strings. Now they're made out of metal or woven chain. But yeah, they rattle against the bottom head. So you hit the top head, and the snares rattle against the bottom. There's a switch on the drums to turn those off, and you just have the sound of the drum. Thin, tight heads, in my experience, feel like playing on a piece of paper. Well, yeah, you just use a smaller stick. Don't try and bang the crap out of it. It's not there to be a loud instrument, and that's something that people forget. Percussion is not always about loud and over the top and these huge effects. The best percussion is that it's used so delicately. Typically, there'll be two types of snare on modern snare drums. One metal and two more gut-like. Yeah, I mean, though there's a lot of variation on that. You can get an all gut or an all metal, and you can change them out too. So the same drum can have, multiple snares on it, just depend on what you put on it. Interesting that the saxophone seems to have come to popularity from military bands, but enough culture independent of that developed the sax doesn't say military the way solo snare does. That's because a solo snare drum doesn't have any pitch to it. It is entirely rhythm. And because it's entirely rhythm, it can only do one thing. Whereas a saxophone has much more than just rhythm it can do. It can do melody. They can do harmony. And so percussion instruments are a very one-dimensional instrument. Most percussion instruments, at least, snare drum. Snare drum is probably one of the most one-dimensional instruments you can have. You can do rhythm and it can do dynamics, and that's about it. Yeah, I can do some kind of tone, but it doesn't have anything else it can do, really. Whereas something like the saxophone can do everything you need except play harmony with itself. Maybe there's a classification scheme that, you've got an instrument that can do rhythm. Okay, that's a level one. That's one dimension. Okay, it can do rhythm and it can do dynamics. That's the second dimension. It can do rhythm, dynamics, and melody. That's 3 dimension. Rhythm, dynamics, melody, and harmony. That's 4 dimensions. So a piano will be a 4-dimensional instrument. Woodwinds would be 3-dimensional. Percussion, snare drum would be 1-dimensional. Maybe there is something to that, and maybe that's something that could be worked into an orchestration text. I am doing a revision of Volume 1. That's not an apology, Sweeter. That's a welcome tangent. Very, very true. The difference in hitting different spots on the drum head is much more subtle than true pitched instrument. Yeah. I mean, if I hit a different spot on this recorder, it doesn't make much difference, does it? I'm not supposed to hit you, am I? Anyway. Go on your peg. No, not the HS classification system at all. That's how the instruments make the sound. I'm talking about a layer of depth to that sound. Because it's a very different kind of classification system. And it would be something that could be developed. I don't know how much use it would have, though, is the thing. Anyway, let's move on. Let's go to what's the next thing we can talk about? Tom Toms. So tom toms are a development of the tenor drum. Tenor drum, of course, basically being a very deep snare drum without the snares. Tom toms are basically um, gradated, graduated tenor drums. Now, there are two different kinds of tom toms. The toms that you see in a drum kit have two heads, a beater head and then a resonating head. Concert tom toms do not have that bottom head, they're just open. And you can typically get the concert toms in sets of 4, though I've seen sets of 8, and you can even theoretically get them tuned chromatically. Okay, Ratchet, while we're at it, idiophones and membranophones. Okay, idiophone, so both idiophones and membranophones are two of the 4 or 5 types of instruments. So idiophone, membranophone, aerophone, chordophone, and then the 5th one is electrophone. So an idiophone is an instrument where the entire body of the instrument vibrates to produce the sound. This is most percussion instruments. So if the whole body is vibrating to produce the sound, it's an idiophone. A membranophone is a drum where the membrane on top is vibrating. An aerophone is, of course, a wind instrument. A chordophone is a string instrument. An electrophone is a keyboard. Yeah. So, but yeah. But back to tom-toms. You don't see tom-toms getting scored a lot anymore. There was a time when you did see quite a bit of tom-toms getting used. You'll see them every now and then in band works. You don't see them very often in orchestra works. Not fully sure why. With that, we can also get into, there are so many different types of drums, and each one will have their own various ways of playing. So we got bongos and congas. Bongos, those, well, let me grab these. These technically are not true bongos. They are Moroccan. True bongos are Latin American, but this kind of gives you, they're hand drums, and you got a small one. I seem to recall that in the 80s there was a thing to use concert toms on drum kits. Absolutely was. So there were a few drummers out there who were using concert toms on their drum kits, but that seemed to have been just a fad, and it did not last very long. But so we can call these bongos, even though technically they are not. I don't actually know what the proper name for these are. They're not nakers. Ratchet, if you know, tell me. I bought these in 99, 2000. I think I actually bought these at Disney World, Epcot. But they're actually pretty good quality. They're ceramic. But anyway, but with no, Jared, I am not laying down a beat. Oh, Lion's Roar. Yeah, let's talk Lion's Roar. Lion's Roar is pretty darn badass. So a Lion's Roar and similarly related instruments is where you take a tom-tom and you poke a hole in the very center of the top head. And you don't want to have a bottom head. It's just one head. And to that, you put a string through it. And I'm not sure. Typically, a thicker twine But what you do is you then rosin up that string, and then you take a cloth and run your hand over it with the rosin so that the string vibrates, which vibrates the drum head. In doing that, you go. It is just a fantastic, creepy effect. Now, there's various ways of doing it. My favorite is you suspend the drum up here, and you can just pull down like you're milking a giant cow. At one time, I had access to a big old marching bass drum, and I was going to turn it into a lion's roar, and you can just go. And with it being a bass drum, the sound produced would have just been this deep and rumbly. It would have been fantastic. I never got to do that, though. It would have been fun. Ligeti used lion's roar effectively in Cymbal, double. Don't even try that. Use a lot of sound effects. Yeah, the first composer to use it was, of course, Edgar Varese. And you can go back and look at ionization. Ionization is one of the first percussion ensemble pieces. Technically, I guess we can call it the first. There's some Granger stuff before that, but it's not fully percussion ensemble. But yeah, Varese loved it. You have to find a good recording of this piece, to be able to hear the lion's roar. But Maslenka 4 has one lion's roar call in it. And I can't remember exactly where it is, but in a good recording, that thing should just really cut through the ensemble, and it's fantastic. But it typically, when you're creating a lion's roar, you do have to ruin temporarily a good concert tom. Though it's just the head. You'd want to use probably an older drum head for that. That is what we call a friction drum. Does the friction drum change it from being a membranophone to an idiophone? I think it might. It's weird. Writing for nothing but percussion sounds hard. What part of the Maslenka 4? It's... I've got the score over here. Let me see. I know it's Child's Garden. Anyway, yeah, it's right before. It's right before that, and it should be right there. Anyway, it's somewhere in the first part. There it is. Lion's Roar, right at measure 230. Yeah. The lack of contrabass register hurts. Well, if you're writing for that percussion ensemble, though, you've got that contrabass register. You've got the bass drum. That is there. Varese is not using any pitched percussion instruments. No, it's not the part with all the toms. It's before that. It's a very delicate part. It's like piccolo and harp and then all of a sudden just lions roar. Yeah, so Varese in his all percussion piece, Ionization, it's all rhythm. So there's no, you're not looking at notes and harmonies, you're just looking at rhythm and timbre. Has anyone ever written a piece where you use food as percussion? I believe the answer to that question is in the form of a very famous poem that goes, "Beans, beans, the magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you toot. The more you toot, the better you feel. So let's have beans with every meal." I seem to recall cactus being edible. Yes, but it doesn't taste very good. A couple months ago, when Mikey was here in town, my girlfriend decided she was gonna take us to the local Mexican market, and somebody there convinced us to buy a pound of cactus, and we decided we were gonna cook it. The thing about cooking cactus is it develops this snot-like mucus. And it's the snot-like mucus around something that basically doesn't have much of a flavor. It's like a dull bell pepper. It could be good, maybe, in a fajita, but yeah. I think John Cage did some bowed cactus stuff. No, John Cage did mushrooms. A lot of mushrooms. Nopales salsa is that the cactus? Yeah, we did not. Oh yeah. Well, okra is fantastic. I love good fried okra. I can go to my local chicken place and I can get fried okra. This is my side. Though when I went for lunch today, I did get mashed potatoes instead of fried okra. But anyway, let's see. What other questions about percussion do we have? Percussion is kind of a never-ending thing. If you really want to dig into it, I would suggest going to the LA Percussion Rentals website. They have a fantastic website that they'll show pictures and the ranges of all the instruments and how much you can rent them for per day. And that's a lot of stuff that the Hollywood studios use. And so much of it can be handmade. So if you have a good workshop, you can start making percussion instruments. I'd like to eventually get there. Man, would I love to be making marimbas in my garage. My garage is actually like the perfect workstation. Is there such a thing as a bass triangle? Also, would a contrabass drum be useless? A bass triangle. I could basically go down to Home Depot right now and I could buy a metal rod and I could bend it in triangle shape and say this is a bass triangle. It would theoretically work. Is it going to have the same kind of effect? Probably not. But yeah, you could. Contrabass drum, would it be useless? No, I don't think it'd be useless at all. Again, my friend Bill just made one, and I kind of watched the whole process. And he made a giant 90-inch contrabass drum. And I think he wasn't even calling it a contrabass drum until I mentioned it in the comment. And now it's all he's calling it is the contrabass drum. But it is a monster of an instrument. And cooking with Brett, that would be fun. I have thought about doing a comedy cooking video for the channel. Basically, where I answer the question definitively, is mayonnaise an instrument? Where I sit and make mayonnaise and see if I can make it sound musical. Have I seen David Bruce's 5 Composers One Thing video? Yes, I have. I love David's channel. He is fantastic. Bass triangle is chimes. No, it's not. Chimes are very, very different. Percussion is endless because that's, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, the comic with the contrabass triangle. What's my favorite non-pitched percussion instrument? Biggest Tam Tam you can find. Anything about a Vibraslap. Vibraslap is interesting. The actual original version of the Vibraslap was an instrument called a Quijada. Um, yeah, exactly right. A jawbone. Literally, it was a Quijada was the jawbone of an ass, and that's what you would see it marketed as. A Quijada, jawbone of an ass. You would take the jawbone. It was like one side of the jawbone of a donkey. You took it and you hit it, and the teeth rattled. After the whole thing had been sitting there desiccating for years, and the teeth would rattle, and that was the sound that was used. The problem with the Quijada is that it didn't work every time you hit it. So somebody decided to make the Vibraslap, and where it would be replicatable every time. And so it gives you that jawbone of an ass sound. Off topic for orchestration composing, but if anyone gets directly involved in recording percussion with lots of high frequency content, ribbon microphones can be better than typical condenser mics. That's good to know. Of course, the only mic I've got is my Blue Yeti here. From what I understand, though, ribbon mics are probably better at most things. Yeah, Glockenspiel. Yeah, those. Yeah, I can see that being a nightmare to record. Certain instruments are extremely difficult to record. Percussion instruments among them. There's no good way to record most of the percussion instruments. Likewise, another instrument that is incredibly difficult to record is the contrabassoon. And that's one reason you can never really hear contrabassoon on most recordings, is it does not pick up well on microphones. There's no good way to mic it. Okay, let's see. What other percussion instruments have we not talked about tonight? Let's see. I mean, again, we could just endless. The more I learn about microphones, the more I realize I have no clue what's going on with microphones at all. And so I'm just going to leave microphone stuff to audio engineers. If you want to get into Beethoven, what piece do you recommend? I mean, let's see. I mean, if you want to get into Beethoven, start with Symphonies 5 and 9, and then add 6 and 3 into that, and then 7, and then the late string quartets, and then all the piano sonatas. I mean, geez, where to start with Beethoven? Start with Symphonies 5 and 9, though. I think those will... let's see. Tambourine. Oh, tambourine is deceptively difficult instrument. Everybody thinks, but I mean, to play tambourine really well, go look at something. Was it the Arabian Dance from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker? The tambourine part of that is just so delicate. It's just the delicate writing of tambourine is what I particularly like. Allophone. I think we talked about allophone a little bit on the the mallet percussion one, but yeah, allophone is probably the newest of the percussion instruments. It's bell flare shapes made of aluminum, hence the name alu. Um, um, yeah, but it's got this very long ring to it. It's a great log drum. Log drums are a type of slit drum, so it's you a great place to listen to log drum is the score to Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, the Fangorn section. Howard Shore uses log drum, bass marimba, and part that actually got cut out. He was using bassoon and contrabassoon as well, but that unfortunately got cut out. Since there are contrabass, bass, and tenor drums, are there soprano and piccolo drums? Well, I mean that's snare drum. That's kind of how they function. Claves, claves can almost function like a soprano woodblock, can't they? And they're loud. We had in college a pair of claves that I swear looked like they were made out of concrete. They were some of the loudest, most penetrating instruments I've ever heard, and I hated them because they hurt. What about shallow hand drums like in Celtic and I think Middle Eastern music? Oh yeah, frame drums. Lots of those. And again, they all have their own technique, whether they're hit by mallet or by hands. And that's another thing with percussion is how are you hitting? Are you hitting with your hands? Are you hitting with mallet? What kind of mallet? I want to write a piece for 4 log drums called Logarithms. Why don't you do that? By the way, does Caroline count as percussion? Technically, yes. Realistically, no, because you're not going to have a percussionist play the Caroline. A Caroline player is going to be a specialized player. And Carolines take different kind of technique. Go watch Rob Scanlon's video on the Caroline, where he looks at the Caroline at is it Northwestern University? It's in Chicago, but they're massive instruments, and it's not one you can really score for because Carolines don't move. What about the hyperclaves? They're made of metal, not 100%, but if that's the actual name. I don't know about hyperclaves. I don't think I want to know about hyperclaves. I don't think I want to know about any instrument that has the word hyper in its name. That just sounds like it needs Ritalin. Metal claves? Yeah, I've heard of an anvil. Oh, anvils. Okay. Anvils are fantastic. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can use anvils. So, I mean, band people, the most famous anvil part is Song of the Blacksmith, movement 3 from Holst's second suite in F. And that's a great anvil part. But by far, the coolest anvil part is from Wagner's Das Rheingold. And here in Das Rheingold, we travel down to Nibelheim, the home of the dwarves, where they are forging the One Ring, the ring of the Nibelungs, not Sauron, because Sauron forges that ring. Though he tricks the elf Celebrimbor to forge all the other rings. But anyway, the dwarves are forging the ring, and Wagner, in order to create the sound of all the anvils forging this one ring, because it took a lot of dwarves to make one tiny ring, and so he has 18 freaking anvils off stage, all hammering away. And the whole orchestra just dies away. and you just hear off in the distance the sound of dwarves banging out on the anvils, forging a ring of cursed gold. Oh, God, it's cool. And then the orchestra slowly comes back in. If they can tell a xylophone player to play celeste, why can't the percussionist play the carillon? You can't tell a xylophone player to play celeste. That's not how it works. The celeste is played by the pianist. You may write it in the part for a percussionist, but it's going to be played by the pianist. Sorry, that's how it works. The carillon is a non-movable instrument. It is affixed to a building. You would have to move the orchestra to the carillon, and there's already going to be a carillon player there, and that's their job. So you don't ask the percussionist to play the carillon. It's perhaps unfortunate that a lot of good instrument percussion got cartoon or farcical associations with the 20th century, like Vibraslap. Maybe they were always a bit farcical. Well, yeah, that was kind of the point. A lot of those percussion instruments are toys. They're sound effects. I mean, there's a reason they're called toys. I mean, could a creative composer come along and use a Vibraslap in a musical way? Sure. I don't know how, though. I think it's time we talk about toys. Let's talk about percussion toys, because the other kind of toys that adults talk about, we're not talking about on this channel because I will get demonetized. A carillon concerto. I'm sure it's probably been done, but again, it's very, very difficult. What's the largest and smallest drum set cymbal ever made? I don't know. I mean, you can probably get 6-inch cymbals, and I've seen up to like 24-inch. 30-inch crashes, yeah. Acme sirens. Yeah, sirens have been used. In fact, I score for sirens in Symphony 2. There is a part in here where I actually score for the percussionists to have 3 sirens going. I think it's 3. Let me find that part real quick. Should be about right there. Yeah. So I've got siren, siren, siren. Yeah, 3 sirens here, and yeah. First, I don't want to get into the debate of first suite versus second suite. The answer is Hammersmith. Hammersmith is the superior piece of the 3. But yeah, so yeah, sirens, very cool effect. Edgar Varese can be credited with introducing them. But yeah, I do use them in Symphony 2. Have 3 going at once. Of course, that is whole section there is the Dream of War, like whistle or ratchet. I think this whole conversation is getting a little bit ratchet. Anyway, yeah. So there are so many toys, and this is why I think a lot of times the percussionist's favorite concert of the year is the Christmas concert, because they get to use all the toys they've got in their catalog, and they just bring them out. They're having so much fun back there. If I were a billionaire, I'd build a concert hall with a pipe organ and a carillon built in. Go for it. I don't know of any such place where it has happened. It would be very cool. But man, one interesting thing about carillons is that a lot of times they're not tuned to A440. Or even, the big one in Chicago that Rob Scanlon did his video on it's really a transposing instrument. And so it's like you play an A and it sounds an F. Because. Since we're back to cymbals again a bit, is there any hi-hat used in band or orchestra literature instead of having someone else stand there with the crash cymbals? Well, yeah, hi-hat cymbals are used all the time. I think there's a significant hi-hat cymbal part in Maslenka's Child's Garden of Dreams. Isn't that just a church? Well, it'd be a very large church, but cathedral, but probably. Although you don't see a lot of churches with full carillons in them. I've also heard of an agogo, mostly the two-pitch ones. Yeah, agogos are instruments for Brazilian samba. So yeah, it's always a two-pitch instrument. The agogo bell is a type of cowbell. And of course, there are cowbells, and I've never written once for cowbells. I have written for cowbell's first cousin, the Almglocken. The Almglocken are tuned Swiss cowbells. So the Swiss cowbell has the very traditional shape that you would expect, curved like this, whereas the Latin cowbell is just straight-sided. David Holsinger loves the hi-hat. David Holsinger also loves the woodblock. Hi-hat is used in the jazzy section. Yeah, it is. And of course, any piece that has drum set in it will have hi-hats. Timbales, yeah. Timbales can get confusing in a score sometimes because the French term timbale literally means timpani. So French probably won't use timbales much because timbale literally means timpani for them. Bowed cowbell is a good sound. I didn't even know you could bow a cowbell. That just sounded dirty when I said it. Oh well, I'm sure we're still getting demonetized. Anyway, Almglocken are beautiful tuned cowbells. Tuned cowbells doesn't do them justice, but that's literally what they are. Almglocken started out as you would get a family of like Swiss cowherds that would come into the city, and for entertainment purposes, they would take their cowbells with the clappers still in them, and they would play them on the streets. And it's from these groups that the Almglocken would emerge. They would just take the clappers out so you didn't have the... Waterphone. Okay, waterphone. Very interesting instrument. Waterphone is one of those... and staff bells. Okay, let's talk waterphone real quick. Interestingly, the waterphone is not named waterphone because you actually put water down in the basin of it. So what a waterphone is, you have a round oval container at the bottom with a stem coming up that you can pour water into it. And so the water will slosh around down here. And around the rim are metal rods. Now these metal rods can be hit or bowed, and it is one of the creepiest sounding instruments out there. I love it. I do have a pretty substantial waterphone part in Symphony 2. It's one of those things that does not get sampled, and so I don't have a sound for it when it does the playback. But so what is Granger talking about when he says staff bells? Staff bells are literally suspended handbells. So, you ever seen a handbell choir? You take those handbells and you suspend them on a rack. And traditionally, actually, a true staff bell would have the clapper removed. And you just play them with mallets. Granger is really the only composer to really ever use them. But staff bell's very cool. Can't forget talking drums. Talking drums are pretty awesome. And really the best example I can give of talking drum is go watch Black Panther. And the music in Black Panther is just so full of talking drums. Like the scene, the initial challenge scene where T'Challa faces off against M'Baku. The rhythm in the background is all talking drums, and it is so cool. I have a video somewhere of a bowed bell tree, or me bowing rather. It sounds like a personal problem. Also bowed vibraphone, bowed marimba, bowed xylophone. Okay, now I've got Bubba Gump in my head. Boiled shrimp, fried shrimp, shrimp etouffee, except bowed shrimp. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, percussion. Endlessly fascinating. And yes, apparently the xylophone we have can be bowed. Interestingly enough, Note Performer has a bowed xylophone sound in it, of all things. So you can literally tell Note Performer to bow the xylophone, and I don't know why. And it'll also bow marimba too, so who knows. All right, but guys, we've been going an hour and a half. I have a feeling my camera probably won't last much longer. Yeah, battery low, so I may shut off here any minute now. Wrap up any questions. And yeah, if you want to join in on our Discord server where we basically hang out and chat like this all week long, just go join Patreon. You can see the link down at the bottom. We've been having fascinating discussions. One of the big ones lately is, of course, my designing of the Great Bass Bassoon, which you can see in the drawing behind me. Are taiko drums European? No, taiko drums are Japanese. Taiko is literally the Japanese word for drum. Wiro, earliest use of the wiro you'll find in the orchestra is Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. And yes, it's wiro, not guiro. But you can destroy anything if you're not careful. Still getting demonetized. Anyway. All right, guys. Next week, I may try and have on my guitar playing friend, and we may be talking guitars next week. He has agreed to come on. We will see what happens there. But anyway, guys, this has been fun, and if you want to continue the discussion, come join us on the Discord server, and just sign up at Patreon. And I will talk to you all next week.